I've been caught, but I'm keeping on check. I've been torn, but I'm keeping on check. I've been broken.
Good afternoon, good evening. This is Dov Tuzman, and you're back on Equal Footing. What a week it has been. Last week we did a show on the Jewish role in American politics, and although it was a political show, as I said at the outset, I didn't think it would be that controversial. Little did I know that this week we would also be doing a show that touches on politics, certainly the situation we live in the world today, but would be infused with great tragedy, with great controversy, with great pain. About 24 hours after we did last week's show, terrorists crossed through barriers between the Gaza Strip and the nation of Israel, killed innocent children, women, elderly, abducted, tortured, humiliated innocent people. It's been a dark time. It feels in times like this that we've not learned any lessons as a human community. It feels unprecedented. Objectively, the violence is unprecedented in the history of the State of Israel. But these horrendous and barbarous acts are not, in fact, and deeply, unfortunately, unprecedented. These lie in a long pattern of cruelty, human upon human, people upon people, nation upon nation. The violation of international law, the violation of any pole of morality, the willingness to destroy life and to ruin peace at any cost for a presumptive righteous end. In programming tonight's show, we thought about bringing in guests to talk about the reaction to tragedy and violence that is dictated by halacha, by Jewish law, by Jewish wisdom. We thought about bringing in psychologists, perhaps, to talk about trauma. We've talked about epigenetic trauma before, generational trauma that certainly as a Jewish people we have from centuries and millennia of persecution and pain. We thought about bringing in someone to talk about the military circumstance and strategy, apparent failure of the intelligence agencies in Israel and elsewhere, to kind of give a bit of a socio-political overlay as well. We decided against all of that. We might do that in future shows. And instead, we try to go to the well of greatness in the face of tragedy. There have been transcendent responses over the history of human civilization to the most unspeakable horrors. Responses that have inspired others to fight, that have inspired others to make change, that have inspired peoples to unify. The purpose of this show is not to compare tragedies, God forbid. That's a fool's errand and it achieves nothing. But to look at some of the responses by leaders, folks that have been in a position to have their voice heard widely, and inspire others to react in a way that would put an end to violence, or sometimes in a way that would show courage in a fight, in the face of long odds and in the face of ongoing pain. We've tried to look back at some of these responses that are actually in the recorded record. It's been less than 200 years that we've had audio recordings. So we don't have Alexander the Great's speech at Susa. We don't have speeches that have been made over history in the face of injustice in their original voice until really the late 19th century, and particularly in better quality that we could actually broadcast on the air in the 20th century and beyond. But it would be difficult to do a show like this without, as we talk about the power of words and the inspiration in the face of tragedy, without at least addressing what many consider to be still the greatest and one of the shortest speeches that has ever been given in general and in the context and the crucible of pain. And this one I'm going to need to read because we don't have a recording of the day on November 19th, 1863, that Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in the face of what still looked like a possible loss of the North in the Civil War in the United States, gave the famous Gettysburg Address. Boy, was Lincoln mistaken when he said before going on stage to speak for less than 2 minutes that the world will little note nor long remember what we say here. But in fact, the world noted at once what he said and will never cease to remember it. As the senator and historian from Boston, Charles Sumner, said, the battle itself was less important than the speech. And here it goes. Abraham Lincoln, November 19th, 1863. 70 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. I've been torn, but I'm keeping on to. I've been broken, but I'm keeping on to. Safe in the eye.
All right, I'm not sure where I got cut off. I'm not sure if I was talking to myself there for the last 10 minutes. I'm going to ask our radio engineer here to tell me if anything has been heard over the last 10 minutes, because I'm calling it. Okay, I haven't given this signal there yet. So I will take a break for a moment, a little bit more lightheartedly, and tell you that this show is being done from abroad. I'm down in South America celebrating my birthday. It's hard to celebrate in these difficult times. I'm trying to keep the vibration of positivity as I can, and my birthday down here and calling in. So I don't know where I was interrupted there, but I was doing my best. And Abraham Lincoln impersonation, I guess, the Gettysburg Address. I want to say that this address was given at a burial ground, at a very difficult battle and an inflection point during the war. And although it may seem strange to some listeners to compare this to what's going on in Israel, I think not. I think it was a point where everything was turned upside down. Everything that people believed in around the United States over the previous almost 100 years was thrown up in the air. Everything was uncertain. The pain was far and wide. As is now the truth, not only in Israel, but I would say throughout the Jewish community. Everyone knows someone that's been affected. Either someone that's died, someone that's been abducted, a family that's lost a loved one. In my case, for example, many family members that are in the Israeli Defense Forces or that have been called up and are awaiting active duty were all touched by this. And this was true as well 180 years ago when Lincoln gave this address and every family was touched. The loss of life in the Civil War was the highest percentage loss of life in any war by any nation until Germany and World War II, and probably those are the two highest fatality rates historically. So I'm going to finish this brief speech. He goes on to say, "It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we were highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Israel is at a similar inflection point. The challenges from across our border are also met within our borders. The need to maintain democratic values, values around human rights, around the sanctity of life. These challenges are brought to the fore like no other time in the face of an invasion, in the face of these horrendous acts. A similar challenge, and then we're going to take a break after this, was on the mind of Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and I hope I have the date right here, June 6, 1940, I believe. June 4th, 1940. Thank you, Derek, great producer, for the correction. The Belgian army had just fallen. The French army was in tatters. It was clear that the Third Reich was going to begin at least an bombardment, if not a full invasion of Britain. And remember, the United States was not in the war at this point. Britain was practically and felt very alone. The Eastern Front had not opened up yet in the way that it would in the year forward. And to any rational observer, it looked like the island, the British Isles, would be no more in their current state. Here is what Churchill said to the nation on the eve of war. If we could play the first audio. Having a bit of a technical difficulty, I think, abroad. Let's play the first audio.
We are told, sir, that Herr Hitler has a plan for invading the British Isles. This has often been thought of before. When Napoleon lay at Boulogne for a year with his flat-bottom boats and his grand army, he was told by someone, "There are bitter weeds in England." There are certainly a great many more of them since the British Expeditionary Force returned. Sir, I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made, as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. At any rate, that is what we are going to try to do. That is the resolve of His Majesty's government, every man of them. That is the will of Parliament and the nation. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
It's hard to appreciate today the incredible importance of that speech. He not only exhorted the people of the British Empire to fight against the incursions of the Third Reich, but it was the beginning of a rhetorical response that would also affect leaders behind closed doors. I think as Jews it's important to know our history always. Churchill, with all his complexity, was one of our great champions. And behind the scenes, he made sure that FDR, that the U.S. entered the war about a year later after the attack on Pearl Harbor, that FDR was aware of the atrocities that were being committed against the Jews. And without Churchill's ongoing, impassioned, and insistent exhortation to the U.S. to join the war in Europe and not just in the Pacific, the nation of Israel might not be here. We might not be here as a people in the form and shape and being that we are today. We'll be right back.
Who can say why your sighs, 'cause your love lies only time? And who can say why your heart cries when you love?
Equal Footing is brought to you in part by Mechanical Art Capital. Mechanical Art Capital offers 1 to 2 day financing to watch collectors and watch dealers from anywhere in the world. Unlock the cash value of your watch collection or your watch inventory with Mechanical Art Capital's buyback contracts. They're halachically sound, not a loan. It's a purchase and buyback of inventory. It's easy to do. Just download the Mechanical Art Capital app from the App Store, either on your Android or Apple device, and have your watches and collections appraised free of charge. Within a couple hours, you get a bid, and then the next day, you get the money in the bank. You can also call Mechanical Art Capital at 833-209-0972. That's 833-209-0972. The easiest way to do this, again, is on the App Store by putting in those 3 words, Mechanical Art Capital. But you can also go to their website, mechanicalartcapital.com. So get that financing for your watch collection, your watch inventory today. mechanicalartcapital.com.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. I've been told.
Okay, we tonight are looking at responses in the face of tragedy. We almost called tonight's show The Power of Words. There's little we can do on the radio other than use our words. But words have so much transcendent power and influence. We're talking now about speeches that have been given by leaders in the face of tragedy and pain and war and injustice. But it's the words that we convey each day that amalgamate to create change in the world. How many of us, since the attack, the brutal attack on Israel last week, have found ourselves talking about this to others? And the way we address it can either be with indignity, with fury, with anger, with the desire for vengeance, or it can be with resolve, with intention, with justice, with proper retribution, and with a desire ultimately for peace, which may necessitate military response, and often does. But that frame of reference is often the difference between inspiring others to our cause and feeding into a narrative that others may have about a cycle of violence. And I've seen this in the media. It makes me want to scream and cry. Already the villainization of the Israeli response to the violence. Can you imagine if there was an incursion by a Caribbean nation in Florida, for example, and there were 260 people that were killed in a beach club? There were folks that came in from the Caribbean island nation and abducted Americans and brought them back and then showed their murder on their own social media accounts. Can you imagine what our response would be in America to that? Can you imagine how we would feel at the villainization of a military response against such an incursion? Well, that's what's happened in Israel. But the way to explain to others our feeling and our cause is not, I think, humbly, through rage, but through intention, through resolve. We're going to switch gears here and talk about the fall of communism. This took many decades. Many who are listeners that historically had emigres and previous generations from behind the Iron Curtain know that this also was a battle between right and wrong, between good and evil, and it took great resolve and great rhetorical power. Let's listen to President John F. Kennedy, June 26, 1963, at the height of the Cold War in Berlin, West Germany. Audio number 2. I'm having a technical difficulty here. Dimitri, can you put on audio number 2?
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it's true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Lass sie nach Berlin kommen. Let them come to Berlin. Freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in, to prevent them from leaving us. While the wall is the most obvious and vivid demonstration of the failures of the communist system, for all the world to see, we take no satisfaction in it, for it is, as your mayor has said, an offense not only against history, but an offense against humanity, separating families, dividing husbands and wives and brothers and sisters, and dividing a people who wish to be joined together. Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Some of the most famous words ever spoken, Ich bin ein Berliner, when John F. Kennedy said, I am a Berliner. And the power of the association of the plight of one person, so that one man is enslaved, we all are, that's a very Jewish concept. That the whole world is saved and you save one life. That the moral imperative, this goes to the hostage situation in Gaza, is to save every life in the face of injustice. JFK understood that and inspired a generation at a time when there was a lot of debate. We didn't play that whole speech, but in the beginning he talks about those who defended communism as a just system, as a system of economic distribution that worked. He understood critics. He didn't shout at them. He spoke with them. He acknowledged the debate. And then he brought it home for all of us by saying, we are all a Berliner at that time. What he meant by that, we were all separated, the separated families in West and East Berlin that symbolized ultimately the division of Europe. He inspired American presidents ahead of him, and then 24 years later, Ronald Reagan gave a speech at the same spot. Dimitri, let's play audio number 3.
Behind me stands a wall that encircles the free sectors of this city, part of a vast system of barriers that divides the entire continent of Europe. From the Baltic south, those barriers cut across Germany in a gash of barbed wire, concrete, dog runs, and guard towers. Farther south, there may be no visible, no obvious wall, but there remain armed guards and checkpoints all the same. Still a restriction on the right to travel. Still an instrument to impose upon ordinary men and women the will of a totalitarian state. Yet it is here in Berlin where the wall emerges most clearly. Here, cutting across your city, where the news photo and the television screen have imprinted this brutal division of a continent upon the mind of the world. Standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is a German, separated from his fellow men. Every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. President von Weizsäcker has said the German question is open as long as the Brandenburg Gate is closed. But today I say, as long as this gate is closed, as long as this scar of a wall is permitted to stand, it is not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind.
Reagan was standing in that same spot. He was in a line of thinkers, politicians, philosophers who were battling the conception, not militarily, but rhetorically, the conception, ill-conceived, of course, that communism was a just system. But what really made his speech powerful was the end. And this was an exhortation to the other side. And I want, if you're listening, to think about this in the context of what's going on in Israel. It's speaking intelligently and impassionately about your sense of justice in the crucible of pain and exhorting the other to make change. Now, we can't do that with Hamas on the ground. We know that. But we can do that with our non-Jewish neighbors here in the United States. We can do that in the political dialogue around this issue around the world. We can humbly and impassionately ask the other, capital O if you will, to help make the change. And who is the other right now? It's those members of Congress that don't understand the pain that Israel has lived through, that misplace an understandable empathy for the Palestinian cause, but place that empathy in a way that is blinded to the means. The end may be just. And I think most Israelis, most Jews would believe the end is just. What do I mean by that? Peace between the people, the ability for people to have self-determination, there to be a respect for human rights, democratic principles. Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East. You know, I saw a documentary the other day that was talking about the incursions in Lebanon in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and the protests that went on in the streets in Israel against some of the perceived human rights abuses there. Even at the time, the war minister, Ariel Sharon, was deposed as a result. Where else can you have that type of in the Middle East where it's not met with repression? Only Israel. We do believe in those principles. Israel is a democracy. Israel is a country that's founded on those inalienable human rights that this country of America was also founded on. The empathy is misplaced when it fails to see that the other side doesn't live by those rules. But again, we don't get there by shouting. We don't get there by insulting the other side politically. We get there by exhorting. And here's Ronald Reagan's exhortation, one of the most famous political exhortations of all time. Let's play audio number 4.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Equal Footing with Dove Tusman is sponsored by MDCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MDCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam in one of MDCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You can even schedule a virtual video visit with MDCS's board-certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.mdcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
I've been caught, but I'm keeping on to. And I've been taught, but I'm keeping on to. Safe in the eyes of the morning. Did you love me, or do you take it all back? Did you need me, or do you take it all back? If you can't love me, then I take it all back. Safe in the eyes of the morning. Safe in the eyes of the morning. Safe in the eyes of the morning. I see more now.
Okay, we're back. This is a bit of a technically challenged show. Thanks for having patience with us. You're on Equal Footing, and we're talking about the reaction that we can have, that we probably should have, to the horrible events that have unfolded in Israel. And that's what we call a transcendent reaction. Reaction in the face of tragedy that moves us forward. We're looking at historical lessons. We've looked at the reaction to the invasion in Western Europe and the impending invasion of Britain in 1940, the process of the end of communism. You heard Ronald Reagan's famous speech at the Brandenburg Gate. In the 1960s, we've talked about this before in the show, the U.S. was in great turmoil. It was a different type of war going on, a war of morality. And I think what people don't really understand, often, and talk about this before the break, around what's going on in Israel, is it's also a war of morality. It's disguised as and manifests as a classic war of physical violence. It is that too. But at root, it is a war of right and wrong. It is a war where there's just action and unjust action. And nothing ever justifies violence against the innocent. And at the same time, in the face of that violence, nothing justifies. Now, I might get some other points of view here, some hate mail or some hate text, but nothing justifies unbridled violence in retribution. Violence that doesn't keep in mind and still attempt in all ways possible to protect the dignity of innocent life. As we conclude the show, we're going to look at that period in the 1960s of turmoil and look at the reaction to injustice and see if we can embody some of that in our reaction to what's going on now in Israel and Gaza. And here we're going to take a slightly we're going to reverse the chronological order that we've done so far. And the first speech actually occurred 5 years after the second. The first speech here is Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, on April 4th, 1968. He's campaigning for president, but he learns right before he gets on stage, minutes before, that Martin Luther King, great justice warrior, had been assassinated. And he knows that the country is now on the brink. King was a man of peace, and he was assassinated by a white supremacist. Here's what RFK had to say to a largely black audience. This is audio number 5.
Do they know about Martin Luther King?
We have left it up to you and let it can be handled.
Could you lower those signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
Robert F. Kennedy was killed 2 months and 2 days after that speech. The ongoing turmoil and rage is evident all, really to this day, the kind of culture wars, if you will, of the 80s and 90s, to the political polarization that we have today, the language of hate, the lack of compassion or empathy for the other. We don't get anywhere that way. It isn't the answer. Let's go back about 5 years prior and hear the great Martin Luther King express in his words how to react to injustice, how to dream. Audio number 6.
My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. One day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee." Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Yeah. There's no one that said it better than MLK. We need more MLKs. Some people consider that the best speech of all time. We played a clip of it, but every part of it moves the human heart and soul. The great Viktor Frankl, challenged by even greater tragedy and unfathomable horrors than you're seeing in Israel today, the context of the Holocaust. He said in his seminal, life-changing book for me, Man's Search for Meaning, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That will, that freedom to choose our reaction, that's what our show tonight is about. In the face of tragedy, we can choose to react in such a way that prolongs and continues that cycle of tragedy. We can pass on, we can have hate in our hearts and pass on that hate to future generations. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't react with an iron fist. I endorse what Prime Minister Netanyahu said, I think it was yesterday, that every Hamas soldier is a dead man. I understand we led with Churchill's speech, we will never surrender. We will fight on the beaches, we will fight in the streets, we will fight in the fields. We didn't have time. I wanted to play FDR's A Day of Infamy speech to Congress right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, where he gives a similar message of resilience and strength and military response that is in the context of justice. And military response is just. But hate is not. Hate doesn't get us anywhere. Vengeance doesn't get us anywhere. Proper response, military response, is called for. It's what we hold in our hearts that also affects ultimately the longer term battle. Because I do have confidence, as I hope and think all listeners of the show do, that the Israeli Defense Forces will prevail. It may take a remilitarization, a repossession, if you will, of Gaza. There are many lessons to be learned from the intelligence failures, of course. But the question is, how will this ripple through the generations? Can we find peace? And I think the first step is in the spirit of MLK's 1963 I Have a Dream speech, that we must ultimately love one another. And if you are rolling your eyes, you think that that's non-comparable. Think of those days. There was also the killing of innocents in Alabama, Georgia, and elsewhere. And of course, the history, the hundreds of years history prior of oppression and murder. And yet, he was able to, again, exhort the other. Martin Luther King spoke to the white man, frankly, more than the black man in his speeches. I'm going to end here. I know not everyone will be able to understand this, but with a short clip from, I think, one of the great speeches of all time as well. This is Golda Meir, the 6th of October, 1973, immediately after the Yom Kippur attack by the governments of Egypt and Syria. And I'll say one part of it in English, and we'll wrap up. I send blessings from every aspect of my being to all of those in Israel and elsewhere that are suffering. May God protect Israel and the IDF, and may justice prevail. And Golda Meir said, "We trust with all our hearts that the spirit and the strength of the IDF to defeat the enemy. The great victory of the IDF is that it lies in the promise for life and for peace." That's finished with audio number 7.
מבעוד בוקר הוא שר והוא חל בגיוס חלקי של כוחות מילואים. אנו בוטחים בכל לב ברוחו ובכוחו של צה"ל להכריע את האויב. ניצחונו של צבא ההגנה לישראל, בו הערובה הפתוחה לחיים ולשלום.